Hey everyone, welcome back to EverydayFI, where we explore the lives of everyday people pursuing financial independence. I'm your host, Meghan Combs, and I'm here to tell you that you do not need $1 million book deal or a famous blog to reach FI early. By talking with real humans, I'll show you how to forge your own path to financial freedom the everyday way. Today is the second half of Jess's live coaching session with David Robinson, and we will reveal whether or not she can actually quit her toxic corporate job after we hear from our sponsors.
So going back to what you were you're talking about using like compound return calculators. And you wanted to see if the amount that you have invested now, compounding on its own, could allow you to take on a passion project. Is that like right now or in the future or what?
More like what my options are. At the beginning, when you were talking about the 4% rule and we were talking about the multiple, like I I guess now that I know there's a lot of variability in it, and there could be the 3.2% rule, right? But then it could also be a lot less conservative than that. Now I'm not really sure what my number is that I could stop at. And what I've learned from this conversation is that, yeah, there could be a sabbatical, there could be a part-time job. I could talk to my employer about working fewer hours and things like that. But I think initially where I thought this conversation could go, because I didn't know that the 4% rule was fluffy, so to speak, and that there was so much variability in it, I was like, well, maybe, I don't know, my retirement number is going to be figured out in this conversation or something. And then I just have to, like, by the end of it, we could say, all right, Jess can retire or take a barista job after 6 years if she's making the same income. But now I'm not really sure what my next steps are. And that's probably okay. And that sounds like it's also more realistic if I'm thinking about the litany of choices that I could make in my lifestyle as well as my finances.
All right. So what I'm hearing you say is that you're less sure than when we started the call. That's the opposite. Well,
Yeah.
okay. No,
Yeah, but
I'm
it's not a
yeah,
bad
I'm
thing.
kidding around, but well, let's start here. So before the call, you had sent over a really cool kind of a breakdown of your expenses and spending and everything. And so you have a super high savings rate. So basically, I'm looking at this and it looks like you earned about just under 140,000 last year. And of that, you had listed that you invested or saved 80,000. Okay. Which is just an outstanding savings rate, right? That's like more than 50% of your income, which is awesome. So going through and kind of like extrapolating that out, would you say that the difference between those two, because you have taxes in here, and I was a little bit confused about that because your taxes are like $1,000, they're like 1,291. I couldn't quite figure out how that was possible, or if that was just like maybe an estimate or something like that.
Yeah, I think that's what I had to pay the IRS after doing taxes because the 140 figure is lower than my actual income, but I think that Monarch is taking that figure from my paychecks.
Gotcha. Okay. Here's what I'll say is that, those tools are really good. Like Monarch, it does a really good job of summarizing and it just creates this like really beautiful like flow chart of like where your money is going. This is fun. But there's definitely value in going through manually, periodically, whether this is once a year or twice a year or whatever, and kind of figuring out what you spend and where your money is going, right? Because just kind of eyeballing this, I mean, it's hard to say, but I would say that your spending is somewhere around maybe 40 or 50,000. Would you say that's pretty close, or would you say it's different than that?
With the mortgage and
Mhm.
everything. Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
Okay. Would you say closer to 40 or closer to 50?
Closer to 50.
50. Okay. And that makes sense because in this case, you earned 140, you saved 80, and those are kind of rounded a little bit. So, and of course, some of that is taxes or whatever. Okay. So that gives us kind of a good idea of a couple of things. Number one, it tells us, okay, assuming that you continue about the same lifestyle, of course, inflation will go up, but, you keep your current lifestyle, we can kind of figure out what do you need to have saved by your mid 60s when your normal old age retirement. when we talk about Coast-Fi, it's like, okay, do I have enough invested in my retirement accounts that with just compound interest growth and no contributions for me, will I have enough in my old age? The reason that that's so important is that you really need that old age money, right? Right now, if you quit your job and spend down a bunch of your portfolio, you could go back to work. That's not that hard. It's much harder when you're older, right? And so you really do want that safety blanket of that old age money kind of growing on its own. And right now, if we look at your portfolio, I think that maybe it was a little less than half of your money was in retirement accounts. Here we go. So you've got 401k of 202,000 and then another 5,000 in a Roth IRA. So yeah, we'll call it is what you have saved up for retirement. Not that it's saved up for retirement, but it's in a retirement account. So we'll just kind of like set that bucket aside and say, okay, that's for my old age money. And here's what's really cool about your position is that here's an easy way to calculate what is that going to be worth in the future. All right. We don't really know what stock market returns are going to be in the future, certainly not in the next 10 years. Maybe in the next 10 years, it'll have a 0% return because we'll have a big, big crash, right? We just don't know. So I don't really like to use compound interest for short periods like that because there's so much variability that it's almost like a meaningless exercise. But I have faith that you're in your mid 30s now. You've got about 3 decades to let this money grow if you're old age. So we can do some kind of easy math. And I like to assume a 7% rate of return for two reasons. Number one is it takes into account a little bit of inflation, right? So it gives you some real numbers, not inflated numbers that don't really mean anything. The other reason is that at a 7% return, you can expect your money to roughly double every 10 years. Now, of course, it's not really going to double every 10 years. It might double the first 5 years and then crash and yada, yada, yada. But as a whole, over 30 years, you can reasonably expect that money to double 3 times. So if we map that out, the first double would be about 400,000, the second would be 800, and the third would be 1.6 million. Okay. That is what you could reasonably expect to have in your retirement bucket for old age. And that's pretty substantial, right? If we were to do, the 4% rule on that, where it's a lot more reasonable to use in old age, that's going to generate about 64K a year. And that's in addition to your Social Security. So just with that back of the envelope math, I would say you're more than Coast-Fi, especially because you have all this money in your brokerage accounts. So here's what that kind of gets you. If you really wanted to, you could stop contributing to your retirement accounts and your old age money is taken care of, right? I wouldn't do that while you're working, and we'll talk about why. It's mostly taxes, right? Take every tax advantage that you can get. But you're in a really cool spot because not only do you have that old age money taken care of, right? You're more than Coast-Fi with that, but you also have about $250,000 in your taxable brokerage accounts, right? Money that's like totally accessible to you right now. Another way of looking at that is that with your spending being about, 50,000 a year, you have 5 years of runway, right? And that's assuming no growth and everything like that.
Can I ask a quick question?
Absolutely.
What do you mean by 5 years of runway? Where does that come from?
That's great. So when I say runway, what I mean is like, let's just say you were to leave paid employment right now with $250,000 saved up, you have 5 years worth of expenses, right? 5 years of $50,000 a year. And even if you just decided, not that you would do this, but even if you just decided, hey man, I need a 5 year sabbatical, I need to take the next 5 years off, really discover myself, whatever you want to do, then you could just let your retirement accounts grow in the background. That should be more than enough to sustain your retirement unless your expenses get really expensive in the future. And then just like live off of that savings that you have. Now, there's a little bit of variability in there because maybe the stock market has a big crash and maybe it won't last 5 years, maybe it'll last 4 years, or maybe it'll grow a lot and it'll last 6 years. We just don't know. But I mean, when I talk about runway, it's like, okay, how long can you survive without having income? That's a great runway. That gives you a ton of different options. Here's the other thing that could look like. You talked about maybe taking a job as a barista. You said you really enjoyed that work in the past. And let's say that you were a part-time barista and you were making, I don't even know, what could you make, 15, 20K a year part-time? Something like that.
I have no idea,
Yeah,
but probably.
yeah, I don't
Yeah.
either. So, if you could, right? I mean, if you're making, say, 15 bucks an hour and you're working 20 hours a week, let's see, what would that be? That'd be about 15 grand. Okay. So that's about a third of your spending, right? That would leave you, your $50,000 of spending minus your 15 grand in, part-time income. That would leave you 35,000 a year that you need to make up. Well, 35,000 a year, I mean, that's going to last about 7 years. So you have 7 years of runway with a part-time job. Gives you a lot of different options, right? So you have to kind of like, instead of saying, okay, how much money do I have? How much do I need? Ask yourself the question, okay, what do I want to do next? What does the future look like to me? Do I want to transition to another career? Do I want to take off a short time and then go job searching for a high paying career? Do I want to do the barista thing and then just kind of like, I don't know, recharge a little bit over the next few years? You have a ton of different options. So I guess I'll give you some homework, which is to think about like, okay, what do I want to do? You know what I mean? And frankly, you may not know the answer yet, but the answer might be, hey, I want to put in my notice, let them know I'm going to be leaving in a month, whatever notice you want to give. And then I just want to take 6 months and decompress. That is absolutely an option that you have, right? Take 6 months and decompress. You've got $250,000 to do that with, which is just huge. That's like a superpower. Kind of lost my train of thought there. My point is that, you know, your old age money is totally taken care of. So you can kind of check that off. And you have $250,000 to live off of, and you don't spend a whole lot of money. And so that will last you a long time, especially if you are taking on part-time work. So what are your thoughts? I just said like a lot of words.
I'm very surprised in a good way. I probably wouldn't quit in the next year or so, and I like the idea of continuing to contribute to my retirement. I think I, as you can tell from my savings, am maybe too conservative generally in like in my financials, and even though I am invested in some pretty high risky ETFs, but outside of that, yeah, I think maybe thought I was in a much more inflexible place than I actually am. So the 5 year runway part is interesting to me and also just a good thing to know, right? And then if I take on a part-time job, whether that be barista or something else, then it makes it, I don't know, into maybe a 7 year runway or rent out my house or something like that. So all great to know. I'm so happy. And then the other thing that I also had no idea about was the investment accounts doubling every 10 or so years. I don't know what to make of that because that's great. 1.6 in 30 years is way more than I thought I could expect.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So the way that I got that, if you haven't already heard of it, there's something called the rule of 72. And the rule of 72 says that you can divide the number 72 by whatever interest rate you are getting on your investment. And that will tell you the number of years that it takes for your investment to double. So to use some easy math, if you were getting a 10% rate of return, 72 divided by 10 is 7.2 years. You could reasonably expect that investment to double approximately every 7.2 years. I like to use 7% for the stock market because number one, I think it's a little bit more conservative and also takes into account some of the effects of inflation so that we're comparing apples to apples. Because of course, what's really going to be in your investment accounts in that 30-year time frame is not that 1.6 million that we talked about. It might be 3 million or something, but of course inflation is going to eat away a lot of that buying power. So I like to look at present dollars. And again, we don't really know what the stock market is going to do in the future. It's possible that we'll have 30 years that are not so great and that you'll only have $1 million instead of 1.6 million. That could happen. It could also go the other way. We could have an amazing 3 decades and you'll have 2.5 million in present dollars. Like we just don't know. I think that 30 years is probably long enough to reasonably expect to average that 7% return, but we just don't know. This is the nature of personal finance and financial planning is that we are trying to predict things that are just unpredictable. And that's why I don't like to make plans for the next 30 years. It's like, okay, what can we do in the immediate future? Like, how can we make your life really great starting right now? 5 years is a much easier chunk to bite off of. I do want to go back. I think that you, based on your spending and everything, I think that you probably have more in your retirement accounts than you'll probably need in the future. Again, unless your lifestyle super inflates, you have more expensive habits in the future, but you're going to get some kind of a social security benefit. And I don't know what that's going to be for you. And it's going to be impacted by whether you make less money in the future or you retire early. That's obviously going to lower your social security benefit. But like, you might even have more runway than you think. And here's what I mean by that. We said that you have about $200,000 in your retirement accounts. Say, let's do some backwards math here. Right now, you're spending about $4,000 a month. Let's say that your social security benefit is going to be $1,500 a month at age, 67, 3 decades from now. So what does that mean? That means that at age 67, you're going to need to make up everything outside of that 1,500 bucks a month. That would be about 2,500 a month coming out of your pocket, right? Out of your investments that you need to generate. So let's work backwards from that. Using the 4% rule, we would need 25 times that annual spending. So that $30,000 deficit that you have, which is coming from your investment, we need 25 times that. Well, that is 750,000. So then if we math that backwards, using the rule of 72, if we cut 750,000 in half, and then in half again, and then in half a third time, what you would need today to grow into that 750,000 is 93,750. So we'll round up and say 100K. So, and I know I just went into a bunch of crazy math that totally makes sense in my head, but I'm going to repeat it. So I'm saying that you would reasonably need $100,000 invested today to grow into about $750,000 30 years from now when you are an old person and you need that money to live. Assuming that you're going to get $1,500 from Social Security, that's going to cover a big chunk of your expenses. You only need to make up the other $2,500 a month, which is $30,000 a year, which using the 4% rule and multiplying that by 25 gives you 750,000. So $100,000 now should provide that portfolio that's going to support your lifestyle along with Social Security to provide you that 50 grand a year. All right, a lot of different numbers. So here's what's so powerful about that is that you've got more than twice that amount saved in your retirement accounts. So when we talked about you having a runway of about 250,000, I said that because that's what's in your brokerage account. But money is very fungible. Just because the money is in your retirement accounts doesn't mean that you have to wait until age 59 and a half, which is the age that you can normally access those accounts. We could have a whole separate discussion about how you access those accounts early. But if we incorporate the extra roughly $100,000 that you have overfunded your retirement accounts with and put that into your runway, now you have about 350,000. So if you've got your part-time barista job making 15 grand a year, that means that 35,000 will take about 10 years to deplete on that $350,000 portfolio, assuming no growth and also assuming not super bad stock market crashes. So, and this is why money is so powerful and you've done such a good job of saving. Like, if you really wanted to, not that you're going to do this, not that I would encourage you to, but you could potentially take the next 10 years and get that part-time job, make that part-time income, reclaim the rest of your life, start working on passion projects, and maybe some of those passion projects will start generating income. That's a super powerful position to be in. You very reasonably have much greater than 5 years of runway, right? So yeah, what's going through your head now?
I don't know. I'm just very surprised that I do have a runway at all. I feel like, again, I am new to the FI community, but when I go on Reddit, for instance, and people are talking about their numbers, they're just much higher than what I have. And so I thought at least conservatively, I have maybe 10 more years of the job that I'm in, saving as much as I do. But in order to make any type of life change, like a sabbatical or part time work, and mixed with passion projects. So this is great. I don't know. I'm very happy that the saving over the years has gotten me to this point, but I think again, maybe this is because of my financial trauma, which is connected to my financial avoidance that I've had most of my life, but I'm almost like skeptical, there's a part of me that is like, well, this can't be true, so I have to keep doing what I'm doing for much longer, but in the maybe this is like a philosophical sense, life is kind of lived right now and anything could happen before 67. And I feel like these types of conversations and knowing where you are very powerful because essentially it means that life can be lived more truly in the moment or several years from wherever somebody is, who knows, depending on how their portfolio is doing, then waiting for it to be lived post retirement, which I thought was going to be many years from now. So I don't know if that made any sense, but that's kind of where my head is at.
That was really beautifully said. And I completely agree. Life should be lived right now. If you had come onto this call and you had told me, I really like my job. I may not always, but I really like my job. It gives me a lot of fulfillment. I like my coworkers. Then I would say, hey, man, keep doing that, right? Keep doing that job because you're making great money and you really enjoy it. But like when you have options, and you definitely have options, why waste any significant amount of time doing something that you don't look forward to every day? Like if you're not getting out of bed, like looking forward to the day and the things that you're going to do at work, the people that you're going to interact with, there are other things that you can do, which may be doing the part-time barista thing, or maybe pursuing one of your passion projects, or just getting a different job and maybe getting that different job in a couple of years after you've had some time to recharge and kind of discover yourself. You have so many different options, and it hurts my heart to see people sometimes who they sort of get laser focused in on it's almost like the Cliff Notes version of FI, where it's like, oh, I need 25x. And once I hit that number, then I can take risks. And it's like, I hate to say it, but like, some of us will not live that long. And that's not the only reason to take quote unquote risks now. You're taking risks with $500,000. Like you're not really taking risks, but you're taking risks now. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that you don't know how long you're going to live. And I would argue that it is totally worth it to spend that money now, really building up your best life, really discovering like who you are as a person and what your best life looks like. And even taking on, like, if there's another career that you want that pays less, but it's really going to light you up and give you a sense of fulfillment, like taking that on, especially if your numbers support it, which I think that they do. Money is this like made up thing. I mean, it really is. It's like this made up thing, and it's a tool that we have that ostensibly should be used to build our best life, but we often don't look at it as that. Especially, I would say the non-fire community. It's like, oh no, I have to make as much money as possible and spend as much money as possible, and that's going to make me happy, right? Spending on a huge house and expensive clothes and a car and yada yada yada. And I would say even within the fire community, we get a little bit of tunnel vision because we get laser focused in on that. Well, I need 25x. Like in your case, I need 1.25 million. Well, shit, I've only, in air quotes, got 500,000. So man, I'm not even halfway there yet. And that is technically true. You are not at the point where you can never work again. That is true. But if I were in your position as a person who your career is not lighting you up, I would not stay in that job for any lengthy period of time. If you're a person, yeah, people make fun of me for telling everybody to quit their job. And yes, I'm telling you that you should consider seeking out something else because the reality is that you're a person who I think you said you're making like 200K a year with bonuses, right?
Mhm.
You are absolutely a person that can easily go and make more money. Even if you got another job making 100K, that's still way more than you spend. That means that you could go back to investing and have a job that really lights you up. I don't know. I really believe that the goal should be to use money to live your best life. And if you can do that now, I would do that now, even if it means dying with less money, right? Because ultimately,
Mhm.
people in the fire community, like when they work too long, you know, they've sort of sacrificed their youngest, healthiest years, at a job that they don't necessarily enjoy for this sort of illusion of security, right? And the only thing that's really going to happen is that by the time they die, they're just going to end up leaving behind millions of dollars. And there's a really good quote. I think it's from the book Die with Zero. I can't quite remember, but it's something along the lines of excessive money left over after death is life unlived. And that quote like really stuck with me. So I really liked what you said about, you should live life now. So anyway, yeah, and I don't want that to be the end of the conversation, but I do think that like based on your spending and based on the numbers that you have, like you have a ton of options ahead of you. And I guess the next step would be thinking about like what do you want the next year, the next 2 years to look like? What do you want to do? Like, do you want to take 6 months and recharge? Do you want to start looking for a different job? Like the world is kind of open to you. So what are your thoughts initially?
That is wild. Yeah, I don't even know how to answer the next 6 months question because, again, I think I was kind of in that tunnel vision mentality of how can I cut my expenses even more so that I can get to the 1.2 even faster. And I got to tell you, when I found out that you are only using your liquid income in the fire amount, I had, because initially I had my home value in this subtracted with how much I still owe on the loan. And so my net worth was way higher. And I was like, you know what? I'm halfway there or a little bit more than halfway there. And when I learned that it's only your liquid net worth, I was devastated. And I was like, oh no, this means I have to work my job so much longer, right? And eat beans and rice until that happens. But yeah, this is very eye-opening in terms of yeah, just the life that I can live in this in the meantime. And I'm even thinking going to another country, right, can be a lot cheaper than living in the US. And I know that some people do, depending if you have a place to live in another country, right? But yeah, it seems like there's so many ways to go, and it's so much closer than I thought it was. So I almost don't even know how to answer the question that I have to think about, I think, which is like, how do I want my life to actually look? Again, being in this like financially avoidant mindset for such a long time, and then just thinking, okay, you have to work a job even if you don't like it because this world is very scary and healthcare is expensive in America, et cetera, et cetera. I need to be like more than a millionaire in order to have any sense of safety. But it's good to know that safety is actually much closer than I thought. And maybe a lot of people in this community also think.
Absolutely. We tend to look at our own finances not with an objective eye. And what I mean by that is that when you talked about how when you were looking at your numbers, you didn't really think or see that there were a lot of possibilities ahead of you other than just continuing to grind it out, right? And build up to that 1.25 million. And we tend to not be able to look at our own numbers very objectively. Like I can look at your numbers and see a realm of possibilities, right? But it's the same as my wife and I, we have our portfolio and I also have money scarcity and I get worried too. And if I was coaching myself objectively, I would tell myself, you are capable of commanding a high salary. You have the whole future ahead of you. It is fine to spend this money now and make it up later if necessary. But I still feel that fear. So it's completely reasonable to feel that way. But yeah, you just have a ton of options ahead of you because you've done such a good job of saving. So anyway, now the more difficult question is, okay, what do you want your next step to be? And the next step might be as simple as, hey, I want to, take 3 months off or 6 months off and just kind of like let my mind decompress, let the dust settle, and then plan out my next move. And once you make that decision, there's a lot of tactical stuff that you can do, right? Like I would say, increase what you have in savings, take the risk out of the market, right? Like at a minimum, I would say, put a year worth of savings in cash savings. What I mean by that is like cash out some of these positions because my fear is that, right now you've got, based on your cash, probably maybe 3 months in your emergency
Mhm.
fund. And for psychological reasons, I wouldn't want you to quit your job, have a big stock market crash, and be like, oh man, I don't want to sell stocks when they're down. Let me go back to work, or let me go back to a high paying job that I don't like. If you cash out that, say, year or maybe even 2 years of spending into cash, sure, you may miss out on some market returns, but it will give you a lot of peace of mind that no matter what the stock market is doing, you'll be okay. When I left my previous job, I was in the Navy. When I left my previous job in 2022, and that was at a time when that whole year the stock market kept going down. And having a lot of money in cash, I had like 2 years, even though I missed out on all the gains of 2023 and 2024. I didn't ever think about the gains that I was missing out on. I just thought about the peace of mind that I had knowing that, hey, I've got the next 24 months in the bank. Like it just made it much easier. So anyway, it's kind of a long way of saying I would build up your cash once you decide to make that decision so that it's out of the market, you're de-risking it, and you don't have to stress out about that. And then there's other conversations to be had about what about health insurance. People in the fire community tend to be pretty familiar with the Affordable Care Act, how to get money or not how to get money, how to get health insurance from the exchanges, how to calculate the subsidy. Nice thing about not having a job is that you can really control your income on paper. And really, some people in the fire community have like less than $100 a month premiums. Some even have free healthcare.
Wow.
Yeah, it's crazy. There are people that were paying more for healthcare while they were working through their employer plan than they do in their sabbatical or retirement or whatever. It's kind of a magic trick. So the healthcare is not as scary as people make it seem. It's just an expense that you deal with, which you might be getting a heavy subsidy. So anyway, those are all kind of technical things to deal with once you make the decision to leave your job.
Wow. I did not know that healthcare could be that attainable because, again, it is just this big, scary monster. And I think a lot of people work jobs in general to get healthcare. So good to know. And definitely a more technical deep dive, maybe for another episode
Sure.
or another time outside of this conversation.
Yeah. And if you want to get kind of an estimate of, what that's going to cost you, there's two places I usually recommend. One is healthcare.gov. That's going to give you the ability to actually plug in what you think your AGI is going to be. Again, you have the ability to control your income. You know what I mean? So figure out what your AGI is going to be and then select from the different plans. They'll have different plans like, bronze, silver, and gold, depending on your healthcare needs. And that's very personal. I don't know if you're a big consumer of healthcare or not. The other place is it's the Kaiser Foundation or Kaiser Family Foundation. Just Google Kaiser ACA calculator, and they have a really good calculator where you plug in, hey, I'm, female, searching for a plan for myself. I was born this year, non-smoker, yada, yada, yada. And it'll tell you what kind of subsidy you can expect based off of that. But again, a lot of people in the fire community find that they're getting free or close to free healthcare because of those subsidies. So it's not as scary as it might seem, for healthcare.
So we're about an hour and a half in. And so I don't want to stop you guys because I love this conversation. But Jess, is there anything else that you want to chat with David in this exchange? It sounds like you guys might have some more conversations to be had outside of this, but is there anything else you would like addressed before we call it a day?
No, I think the takeaways, I'm probably going to forget something, but build up cash in case, if a sabbatical is near, maybe transfer some of my money or sell strategically so that it is in something safer and simplify, which I'm way on board with. And yeah, in general, that there is a lot more latitude than I thought. And then just a comment going back to the idea of runway and it being in the immediate or more in the immediate than I thought it was, it actually kind of changes my outlook on my job. I'm like, maybe it's not that bad. But I think when, again, you do have this tunnel vision, maybe there's this fallacy that you have to be doing your job, and that makes it so much more mentally taxing. So that's all for me. Those are my only comments, I suppose.
So one thing that we didn't talk about, there's a great book called The Simple Path to Wealth, which if you haven't read it, it's really good. It's kind of like a staple in the fire community. The author's name is J.L. Collins. It's a great book because it gives a good introduction to basic investing concepts, why index funds are great. But there's also a lot of stories that he tells because he's an older guy in his 70s. So he has been investing since 1975, right? So anyway, lots of great lessons to be gleaned from that book. But one of the really cool concepts that he talks about in that book is the idea of fuck you money, right? And this is the idea that now, you don't have to stay at this job. You have other opportunities, which can include taking years and years off of work or switching careers. You are not bound to that job. And you said something that really resonated with me, very much along the lines of that fuck you money, which is like, hey, knowing that I don't have to stay in this job kind of makes it feel a little bit less taxing. That is something that a lot of people discover. And it actually improves their work because, maybe there are things that you don't want to bring up because you're afraid of getting fired or pissing off the boss or something like that. well, you don't need this job. So you can be like, hey, this is my actual opinion about this. And what's very interesting is that a lot of people find that they excel more at their jobs because they're the only person in the room that's like honest and giving honest feedback to the boss because everybody else is like, doesn't want to rock the boat. They just want to keep their heads low, stay under the radar. So it's kind of a fascinating concept where people actually are more respected at their jobs because they're not just like keeping their heads low and having to, not give honest feedback about things. So that's something that people find sometimes. The other thing that I was going to say is that one of the other options that we didn't really talk about is the ability to do things like scale back to part-time if that's an opportunity, right? Go to your boss and you can make up an excuse or you can just say, hey, I'd love to scale down to part-time. With your salary, even if you cut your hours in half, you'd still be making way more than you spend. You could still continue saving and everything like that. And if that was an opportunity, at your work, that could give you a lot more work-life balance. You could also start declining projects that you don't want to take on. Like if there's something that really sucks about your job, just go to your boss and be like, hey, unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to continue doing that, right? And make him an excuse if you want. There's a guy in the fire community named Mark Troutman, and he was an investment guy for a long time, like worked in various Wall Street firms since like the 80s. And when I don't know if he had discovered fire or not, but he knew that he had more than enough. And so he actually told them, he's like, hey, I'm leaving New Jersey, moving to Colorado. And I think that he probably tried to resign. And then they said, no, 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 we really want to keep you. And he's like, well, you're going to have to let me work remotely, which was like people didn't really do back then. And they're like, okay. And he's like, also, I don't want to deal with any customer facing stuff. I just want to manage the fund. And he had like all of these requests. And apparently his coworkers were like, what the hell? Why does Mark get to do all that stuff? Because Mark didn't need that job. So my point is that you have the ability now that you know that you don't have to do this job. If you have the ability to start offloading some of the crap that you don't want to deal with, you know what I mean? Maybe you can do that, or maybe you can scale down to part-time. That could be another option for you. The worst that your employer can say is no. And at that point, you can say, okay, I've thought it over a lot, and I'm actually going to go ahead and resign because I'm just, I don't know, going a different direction. The sky's kind of the limit for the options that you have. So,
The implication that you can be more authentic once you don't care as much about rocking the boat is blowing my mind because that is the stuff that I think bothers me about my work is the inability to be authentic because you're, dealing with politics and not wanting to do that. But I love it. Yeah, I love the freedom in that. Oh yeah, the question I had. So you were talking about fuck you money, and how does that go back to all of this? Is that because the idea is my job technically is fuck you money at this point? Okay.
yeah, that's a great question. So, the concept of fuck you money is like, you don't need to stay. So, you have the ability to tell your boss, fuck you. That's really what it comes from, right? As brash as that sounds. So it's kind of just a fun way of saying, I have the power in this relationship, right? I am not 99% of Americans cannot afford to leave their jobs, right? They need that paycheck. If they don't get the next paycheck, they're not going to write their mortgage, check next month. They're not going to be able to put food on the table. And that's a terrible position to be in. People in the fire community tend to be on the other end of that. It's like, hey, I've got my own runway, or maybe I'm financially independent. Like, I don't need this job. Therefore, I can tell my boss, fuck you, I'm not doing that. And the worst that, he or she is going to do is, terminate you. So there's real power in that. You've shifted the power dynamic to you, right? Instead of your boss having control over you and you being required to do all of the things that they want you to do, which might include working on the weekends, responding to your phone at home. Fuck that. Like, you don't need to do any of that. And you can make it clear, like, hey, after I go home at 5 p.m. on Friday, I will see you Monday at 8 a.m. But I unfortunately will not be able to respond to anything or check into my email or whatever. I just know there's so many people that I know that are constantly responding to things at work at night. And it's like, man, what are you doing?
All right. Well, I'm going to call an end to this awesome coaching session because we've been in here for a while now, which has been really fun. And Jess, David, thank you so much for being here. And I'll make sure you guys have your contact information together. So, Jess, if you want to follow up with David and maybe have some more sessions, you can do that. And yeah, and David, I'll put your information in the show notes for the audience. If anybody's like, man, I want the same sort of thing from David, I will make sure to make that happen. And David, didn't you say that you have a business you're starting soon? Do you want to talk a little bit about that before we go?
Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah, so this has been like 7 years in the making. So, well, I'll start with I should have done this a long, long time ago, but I suffer from imposter syndrome. It's like the natural, like, oh, I'm not smart enough to give investment advice or do financial planning. And there's so many people out there that know it. And who am I? All that kind of bullshit that we tell ourselves, right? And I still, deep down inside, believe that. I'm like, oh, I'm not ready for this. I'm not smart enough, blah, blah, blah. Luckily, I have a lot of really supportive friends who are like, dude, you need to do this, right? It's all of that external, like, motivating me. So, yeah, I've made the decision that I'm going to start my own financial planning firm probably spring or summer of next year. And yeah, it's really scary and it's going to be expensive. Planning on pulling out about $100,000 from our retirement savings to take this big risk. It usually takes about 3 years to actually become profitable. So I know it's going to be kind of a slow process or whatever, but I don't know. I'm really passionate about this work. So yeah, I'm going to launch my own financial planning firm next year and hopefully start doing this as like a real grown up job. And yeah, hopefully get to work with a lot of cool people, helping them solve these very complex problems that they're dealing with. But yeah, Megan, you know me. I love having these conversations and helping people just work through these very difficult problems. So anyway, I'm going to do it and do it as my sort of my next career, I guess. I haven't come up with a name yet, so unfortunately I can't give you like a name or a website or anything like that. But yeah, and Jess, for you, I'd love to go through, if you want to meet like offline, I'd love to go through the more technical sides of like how you actually start to decumulate, how taxes work, how you can do this in a tax efficient way. I'd love to talk more about all of that stuff. If you ever want to, reach out and schedule another time.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll definitely take advantage of that.
Great. Well, thank you both for being here. And that's it for the show today, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the EverydayFI podcast. If you're loving this show, here are some things you can do. Number 1, subscribe in your favorite podcast player and share the show with your friends and family. You can also find us on YouTube now. Some of the videos actually have our faces. Number 2, please leave a review. I am always looking for ways to improve the show. Number 3, check out my website, everyday-fi.com, where you can listen to all the episodes and leave comments for myself and the guest. Number 4, if you're interested in sharing your own financial independence story and connecting with other community members, you can find a submission form at everyday-fi.com/podcast. And lastly, number 5, join my Patreon membership for only $5 a month at patreon.com/everydayfi podcast. This is a one-woman show, so every little bit of support really helps. See you next time as we continue to go down the path to financial freedom.